All right, we're on our last graph of chapter 2. Huzzah! Now, I reiterate that I'm bringing up a lot of these graphs not because they're gone over in the text, but because one of the things that we expect you to know how to do in this course is read more complicated graphs with a critical eye. Know what you're looking at, be able to analyze it, and piece out important information. And that's what we've been doing in this last example, kind of teasing out some important points that the graph was trying to show us. In particular, I'm interested in financial stuff, so I've used a lot of financial graphs from Planet Money, which is a great NPR blog, but you could find complicated graphs that are well done like this in lots of places. Okay, this one is showing economic inequality from the mid-1980s and the late 2000s. So mid-1980s is the little line there, if you will, and then the arrow shows the direction it's going. So these countries over here have increasing inequality, right? So that shows how much inequality they had in the mid-1980s and then where they went to in the 2000s, late 2000s. And then over here are the countries that had decreasing inequality during that time period. Or in the case of Hungary, not much difference at all because it's pretty much the same for both time periods. Okay, that's why there's no little arrow there because you can't really see it. So the countries on the left have growing inequality in their country, income inequality, I should say. Now, what does that mean? Income inequality is the disparity, the difference, the gap, let's put it that way, the gap between rich people and poor people, right? Between the rich and the poor is getting larger in all of these countries. Now, the country with the most, or with the largest gap and the largest growth, honestly. So no, it's actually the largest gap in 2008 and in 2000 or 1980s was Mexico. Oops. The country with the second largest gap is the US, right? Because we're right here. There's our little arrow. So in 2008, we are the second highest. Our arrow is higher, right? Actually, Turkey technically is larger than us, and they're decreasing. So I should say second largest gap is Turkey, and third is the U.S. Sorry, I didn't notice Turkey over there, but Turkey's higher than us, so they count. So Turkey, U.S. is third. Now the difference between Turkey and the U.S. is that the U.S. is getting worse, right? We grew between the 1980s and 2000, and then Turkey is getting smaller, right? The gap between rich and poor is going down in Turkey. Okay. Matter of fact, let me type that up. Hold on one sec. Okay, so U.S. was increasing, Turkey is decreasing. Oops, let me make that smaller so we can see this a little bit better. And then the country with the smallest gap was actually Denmark in 2008, that is. Smallest gap before then, smallest gap in the 1980s was Sweden. So let me write that up. Hold on. There we go. Smallest gap in 1980s was Sweden. Smallest gap in 2008 is this one, Denmark. You can see it's sort of a Pareto chart because it goes from highest to lowest. It's just a modified Pareto chart. The country that made the largest change, that's kind of a hard one to guess, but it's the spread between where they were in the 80s and where they are now. I'm thinking it's Sweden. Either Sweden or maybe this country. Who's that? That's New Zealand right there. Because they had the largest arrow difference, the largest bar between their little dash and the arrow up there. And the country with the smallest change, I mentioned it before, was Hungary, because there basically is no bar at all because there's no arrow. It's basically the same in both years. All right, we're all done. I hope you enjoyed chapter 2. See you later.